And we return to the record with Mr. McCauley on direct. Before we start, Mr. Filippini, I just want to note that it seems that your speaker doesn't always pick me up right away when I'm speaking. And so all I ask is that you simply do what you did last time. That worked well at the lunch break to say, I think we're about time, and cutting it off. That'll work fine. If for some reason I need to step in while the two of you are doing your direct, I'll mute you or something like that, and it'll work just fine. But for the getting to the break at 3 o'clock, 2:58, 2:59, just keep an eye on it. And I think that worked well for the lunch. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I will note, just for the record, there's a bit of an echo from your end. It's not distorted, but it's slightly there. And I understand why you're managing your microphones the way you are. So we'll just work with what we've got. It works fine, but I can hear it, and I don't want you to change your microphones to accommodate anything.
Thank you. I will take you back, Bob, to Exhibit C28. It's the worksheet for the Seattle Marriott. I'm sorry, I just have to share screen here. Okay, I was asking you questions in this scenario A, entitled Rate and Vacancy Changes. So you described before the lunch break how you generate these high and low revenue estimates. In this middle column, what do you do next with these low and high revenue estimates?
Those are capitalized into two separate value ranges.
Okay, and how do you do just so the folks can follow on? How do you do that?
Yeah, similar to the before discussion, the capitalization rate is divided into the new net operating income.
Okay, and what is the net operating income composed of?
That is the potential gross revenue or income less expenses and vacancy loss creates the net operating income.
And I can see as between scenario A and the before, I'm moving the cursor or this little hand, you kept the cap rate the same in both of those scenarios?
Correct.
Okay, and then let's segue to the final column on this spreadsheet in the far right, entitled Scenario B-OAR Changes. And what's happening in this section of the worksheet?
Yeah, in this section of the worksheet, all of the revenue and net operating income is the same as the before condition. We are just changing the capitalization rate.
And so, okay, so these sections up here, revenue and income and expenses are all the same as in the original column of before?
Correct.
Okay, so I'll take us down then to, is this where you indicate the capitalization rates between the low and high scenario, Bob, in the indicated value section?
Yes.
Okay. What purpose does adjusting the cap rate serve in this scenario B?
The cap rate is really a function of risk, and the lower the cap rate, the greater potential revenue upside and less risk inherent in the investment of the property would be reflected in the market.
Okay, and so looks like your capitalization rate in before was 7.25%.
Yes.
And so what are the two in the low scenario for scenario B? What did you have the cap rate at?
We're looking at a cap rate of 7.05 in the low to 7% in the high.
And what would you say to the argument that that difference, 0.05% difference in cap rates, is not measurable?
That it is. Differences like that are reflected often in the market for various types of risk components.
Okay. In other words, that it is measurable?
Yes.
And where did you get these numbers from? So 7.05 cap rate in the low, 7 in the high. Where do those come from?
They're derived from the market, from market sales.
So stepping back, Bob, you've generated 4 scenarios, A and B, A and B. A and B in scenario A and B in scenario B, or low and high in both of them. What was the purpose of these 4 scenarios?
To reflect how the market would look at a property like this from an investment standpoint, a purchase standpoint, after the LID's completed, so that they would recognize the location change, the amenities that this has, and its location in the after, having a $346 million improvement project, very close proximity to some of the main components of that local improvement district project.
I'm going to take you down. I'll scroll over, Bob. I don't know if you're following on paper or on the screen, but lower left-hand corner entitled Special Benefit Summary. And my question here is, what was your conclusion in terms of total estimated value with the lid?
With the lid, our total estimated value was $173,352,000.
And then what were the ranges of your scenarios for? And I don't intend for, what were the high and low for the scenarios you generated?
Yeah, approximately 172,740,000 to 175,414,000.
So how did you arrive, in between, in that range of those 4 values you gave us, how did you arrive at 173,352,000?
Using judgment, looking at what other probable sales of this type of investment would increase given the location change in the market, the proximity to the new locations, the real close proximity to the waterfront, and just the desirability of the investment would be enhanced. And so, like anything we do, it's an appraisal. Like any appraiser does, we make judgment calls, and we make judgment calls based on our experience and and looking at the market and the market information that we have to draw our conclusions from. So also to maintain proportionality, we would look and see what other, if we, at that point in time, if we'd done other hotels in that location, we would look and see what approximately we saw, like for the Four Seasons and other types of hotels that have pretty significant dollar changes. Are we being roughly proportionate in that judgment, so that we aren't estimating some value change that is significantly higher or different from a similarly situated hotel that's in the market area?
For the hotel properties, did you include the value of personal property in the value of the hotel?
Yes, it's called the FF&E, typically in the hotel market, which is furnitures, fixtures, and equipment.
And did you assume that the hotels were stabilized when determining the current market value?
Yes.
I should say when determining their before value.
Both, yeah. Both in the before, and then after, we assumed that was the stabilized occupancy in the after.
How did Mr. Gordon estimate after or with LID values in his restricted appraisal?
Mr. Gordon did not do any type of after valuation. It was totally ignored in his appraisal process, which, if you're going to do an appraisal for a special benefit, you need to do both a before and after. And even if you don't think there's any special benefit, which in this case I can't see any logical, common sense reason why this property wouldn't go up in value in the after. A property like this is clearly going to market themselves and accentuate their location next to these new waterfront amenities and the attributes that they provide in the marketplace. So, I mean, even for some reason, if Mr. Gordon didn't think this property benefited at all, you still need to address that. You need to address why. You need to look at market evidence of why it wouldn't increase in value. But nevertheless, it needs to be included for any valid special benefit report to be credible.
All right, I'll unpin this, and I'm gonna ask you, Bob, if you can look at Exhibit C29 and C30. You can get those out. Have you had a chance to, well, first let me ask, do you have them
Yes.
in front of you? Have you had a chance to review these documents?
Yes.
Please identify them for us.
Yeah, they're two appraisal reviews by O'Connor Consulting Group, LLC. One is of the Harbor Steps Apartments, and the other is of the Helios Apartments.
Okay. And what are the, as you understand it, what is the difference between these two documents?
Essentially, they're the same. It's just that he states that in the before condition that we overvalued the properties. Other than that, the critiques are essentially the same.
Okay. So I'm going to, I won't walk you through C30. I'll walk you through C29 based on that. Let me ask first, what is a desk review? For an appraiser, what is a desk review?
There are two types of appraisal reviews. A desk review where you don't inspect the subject market area, you don't inspect the comparables, and you don't inspect the subject property. You just simply review the content of the report from your desk. A field review is that you would inspect the neighborhood, the market area, review the comparables, and inspect the subject property. And inspect the comparables too.
And which review is Exhibit C29 and C30? Which type of review?
This is a desk review.
Beyond these reports, are you familiar with Mr. O'Connor's testimony in this hearing?
I believe I reviewed his testimony. I know I've read this review.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to look at page 3 of Exhibit 29. Page 3 contains a list of bullet points under the line, quote, a summary of our included findings is as follows. And I'm going to walk through Mr. O'Connor's conclusions with you and ask you questions as we go. In the first bullet, Mr. O'Connor states that, quote, the market value conclusion without WID is substantially overstated. It appears that the ABS appraisal overstates the market value without WID by approximately $88 million. And my question to you is, do you agree? What is your opinion of the market valuation in the before that you gave to Harbor Steps?
I think our valuation is valid. We had a lot of good market information. One of the main differences may lie, and I do not know how he came up with this $88 million difference. He claims he's looking at actual current income, and perhaps he's not recognizing the assumptions that we're making, that the viaduct's removed and Alaska Way has been rebuilt. That could be one of the reasons for a difference. Again, I just don't know, given the content of this review, how he arrived at that figure.
And when you say those are the assumptions you're making with respect to, for instance, removal of the viaduct, you mean in your before calculations?
Correct, yes.
The second bullet point on page 3 of Exhibit C29, Mr. O'Connor claims that ABS, quote, did not empirically solve for the special benefit, but rather assigned a new market value based upon older and very general park impact studies, and then subtracted his overstated market value without WID to reach a special benefit conclusion. And what's your response?
False. We looked at a number of properties that very similar elements of comparison to that which affects the LID area and the Harbor Steps property. So I disagree that with this statement.
Did you apply a percentage increase to the before values?
No, our before values, the before and after values are the dollar figure of special benefit that was created.
Okay. The third bullet, Mr. O'Connor states, quote, it appears that the ABS appraiser did not have a before lid park graphic to compare to the after lid park graphic when he did his preliminary evaluation. Is that accurate?
No, I mean the graphics renderings go back. Even there were some done for the feasibility study we did. So we certainly had some for the preliminary formation estimate we did, and then definitely as we've gone over throughout this testimony, the addenda has a very extensive outline and graphics of the before and after situation.
Did the renderings that you reviewed remain constant between your 3 studies?
No, they changed over time and were refined over time.
Next, Mr. O'Connor states, quote, and this is the 4th bullet point, by the way, the incremental park value due to the LID is so small as to be impossible to reasonably assess the enhanced market value of said improvements. And what's your response?
Well, I disagree. There's a measurable difference in market value within our analysis sheet, and that is special benefit.
And what is your response to the argument that that increase is so small as to be impossible to reasonably assess?
Well, in any benefit study, you're going to have different incremental value increases. So as long as you can show that there's a measurable difference in market value, which in this case there certainly is, given its location, very close to the waterfront, that there's special benefit there.
And are you aware of any minimum amount of increase that is required in order for a valid assessment under a special benefit study?
No.
Do you agree with Mr. O'Connor's statement in this bullet point that the lid improvements are only a small incremental improvement?
No, I mean, I think a $346 million investment in the waterfront is not a small incremental amount, and certainly reflects special benefit.
Moving to the next bullet, the 5th bullet. Mr. O'Connor states, quote, the appraiser made no mention, parentheses, we could find, of the impact of losing approximately 450 parking stalls due to the enhanced park. I know you've described for us how you considered parking. Did you take into account the impact of losing approximately 450 parking stalls?
I have no idea where that figure is coming from or how he derived that magnitude of parking loss.
What was your understanding of approximately how many parking stalls would be lost between the before and after lid scenarios?
Yeah, there'd probably approximately 100 or more that would be lost potentially along the waterfront. We considered them as you know, being parking stalls that were lost in the after.
What evidence did you see in conducting your study that harbor steps or Helios would be affected by parking loss?
None.
Bullet point 6. Mr. O'Connor states that, quote, overlook walk is a clear benefit. It goes on to state that, quote, it would be difficult for harbor steps to gain any enhanced market value for an improvement that is 4 to 5 blocks north. What is your opinion on the impact of the LID improvements on harbor steps?
I think its proximity to the overlook walk would be a very good upgrade to its locational characteristics, its appeal in the marketplace, its connectivity to the waterfront, and would be a very desirable element along with the other elements in the LID.
And how do you respond to the argument that the overlook walk is 4 to 5 blocks north? How does that affect your analysis? That assuming the overlook walk is 4 to 5 blocks north of harbor steps,
we would recognize proportionately, as we've done with other properties, its distance from there. But based on other studies we've done, it's clearly we clearly have an influence on any buyer and seller's decision, any investment decision in buying the property as a positive amenity.
In the 7th bullet point, in the last sentence, after describing some of the enhancements as Mr. O'Connor understands them from the LID, concludes they're, quote, not significant enough to increase rents and thus market value. What's your response?
I just disagree. I think there's strong evidence to suggest there's increase in market value due to the LID improvements.
And what's your understanding what Mr. O'Connor is basing this statement on? His statement, there's not significant enough these items to increase rents and thus market value.
I have no idea. I mean, he's providing no market evidence to support any comment like that. It's just a statement with no market support.
Go to the 8th bullet point, the very next one. Mr. O'Connor states, quote, the enhanced park seems more like an enhanced boulevard. Nice to have, but not likely to compare to substantial parks that may impact value as stated in his appraisal. What's your position? Again,
just looking at the significance of the Waterfront Seattle improvements, yeah, I disagree. I think that there's definitely strong enhancement in the market and is exemplified within the comparable projects we looked at, and that it would reflect special benefits to the property.
In the, now I'm on the 3rd to last bullet from on page 3 still of Exhibit C29. Mr. O'Connor states, is the opinion of this review appraiser, of Mr. O'Connor, that the mass appraisal technique does not accurately capture the current market value of harbor steps and by extension, the prospective market value of harbor steps after the LID improvements would be constructed. Do you agree?
No, I mean, we prepared a worksheet on the property, did extensive research into the apartment market, locational characteristics for properties like this. So I disagree with that comment.
But let me step back and ask you, how about, let's focus on the mass appraisal piece. What is your opinion as to whether or not the mass appraisal technique accurately captured any value increase for this
Well, I think it definitely did. We're looking at each parcel by parcel individually. So I think that technique is valid. It is valid in reflecting benefit for this property, not only this property, but other properties in the LID.
Simo, I'll ask you about it so that we go through all of them. But the second and last point that Mr. O'Connor makes on page 3 critiques the use of the mass appraisal technique, quote, because the incremental change in value is so small as to be within the margin of error for an appraiser. I know you've testified about this already, but please explain to us, what is your understanding of the margin of error for the mass appraisal technique?
There is no margin of error. We're looking at it and estimating it based on our judgment, and in properties like this where you have the very high valued property, even quite large dollar benefit amounts can reflect percentage-wise fairly low changes. So I totally disagree with that comment.
In the last bullet point on this page, he states, quote, the appraiser does not present an income approach to value for the subject property, and that does not appear to define the increase in market rents that would lead to enhanced market value due to the WIT improvements. Is that accurate?
No, we prepared a worksheet on this property.
Right, and what was the approach to value that you used?
The income approach.
Top of the next page, if you could turn, Mr. McCauley, to page 4 of Exhibit C29. First point, I'll just read the first sentence into the record. Quote, we would also point out that market rents will increase even without the WIT improvements, and thus the increased rents that ABS appraisal implies would need to be above those that would be captured without the WIT improvements. What is your response? Let me ask, how would an increase in market rents factor into special benefit analysis?
Well, if what we're looking at is specifically how these LID improvements will impact the property, and we're seeing that these types of properties increase rent for investment grade property like Harbor Steps. If there were other elements outside of that are increasing rents, that would be the same both in the before and after conditions. But we're just specifically looking at the impact of the increased revenue based on the LID improvements.
Okay, and the second to last bullet point on page 4, Mr. O'Connor states that, first sentence, quote, the LID park improvements are more marginal in nature, but are attractive and will be a clear improvement for the waterfront. However, it appears to us that the LID benefit is a general benefit rather than a special benefit. Do you agree?
Again, I mean, the scope of our study is just to look at special benefit and what is measurable. Projects like this would have a general benefit to the public at large, but we're not measuring that. We're just measuring the special benefit to the particular property.
And so can an improvement generate both special and general benefit?
Well, the element that's creating values, like the LID element that's creating value would, may create general benefit to the public at large, and that could be within the LID area and outside of it. But as far as a particular property goes, we're not trying to estimate the general benefit to the particular property. We've never done so. We're just purely looking at the special benefit, the measurable difference in value to the property.
And as I understand your testimony, that if you find a measurable distance, a measurable difference in value for a parcel from the improvement, that's a special benefit.
Correct.
I don't have any further questions for you on that exhibit or C30. So I'd ask you if you could take out C31, please. And given folks at home a chance to pull this up on their computers, can you, before I ask you specific questions about it, please just tell us what this is.
This is a document from John Crompton to Mr. Lutz, RE Waterfront Seattle LID Special Benefits Report.
Have you had a chance to read this document?
Yes, I have.
And are you familiar with the testimony provided by Dr. Crompton in this hearing?
Yes.
And before I ask you specific questions about Dr. Crompton's testimony here, can you explain for us generally, how did ABS Valuation use his research in your final special benefit study?
It was a good source of information, primarily used for background information. We didn't solely rely on it. It mainly deals with residential markets and the impacts on parks to residential property values.
And did ABS apply the distance and percentage estimates reported in Dr. Crompton's research to determine the LID boundary?
No, we looked at it as background, but we didn't use it to define an LID boundary. And it would be illogical to do so. It deals only with residential property, and we're looking at a broad spectrum of different uses, including a wide variety of commercial uses that aren't applicable to his study.
And similar question, but slightly different. Did ABS apply the distance and percentage estimates reported in Dr. Crompton's research to assign a percentage of special benefit to properties within the LID?
No, again, we used it as background, but we didn't use it to assign value increases.
And did you assign value increases to properties within the LID?
No. Well, any value increase in our study was based on the before and after differences in market value. They weren't assigned.
In your professional opinion, would it have been reasonable for ABS to directly apply the value and distance conclusions contained in Dr. Crompton's 2001/2004 report to the Waterfront LID?
No.
And why not?
He's looking primarily just at park influences. There are many other influences, streetscapes and other factors that are relevant in the Waterfront project. So again, it was a good source of information, but it wasn't the sole source of information that we used in determining our estimates.
And what property type was the focus of Dr. Crompton's 2001/2004 report?
Residential.
Okay, I'll ask you some questions now on Exhibit C31. On page 1, in the middle of the first paragraph, under the heading Updated Material, so the first paragraph under that heading, Dr. Crompton states, quote, the appraiser also referenced that his study was updated in 2014. He does not cite a reference for the 2014 update, and I am unaware of such an update. So what 2014 update was your final study referring to?
It was an update that he prepared with Peter Hammock.
Okay, so it was an update by Dr. Crompton?
Yes.
And did you review that in your research for this project?
Yes, it was part of the background information we used for our study.
And do you recall what was the format of that update? Was it what was the format in which it was published?
As I recall, it was kind of in a letter form, showing the different differences of residential property relative to park type of use.
Further down this page in the second paragraph from the bottom, Dr. Crumpton notes, first sentence, quote, in 2020, together with the co-author, I updated the 2001 JLR article. Then on the next page of Exhibit C31, page 2, Dr. Crumpton has a summary of his updated review. And he has a quotation on page 2. Do you see the quotation Dr. Crumpton has on page 2 of Exhibit C31?
The second paragraph there?
Yes.
Yeah.
Starts out with when the highest premiums reported in each study were tabulated?
Yeah.
Okay. First, let me ask you, did you have access to this updated study when you did your final benefit study?
No, we did not. We were not aware of it.
And would access to this updated study have changed your conclusions in the final benefit study?
I don't think so. I mean, it would have been helpful to have potentially, but the conclusions he came up with are actually more in line with what we found in the marketplace relative to the Seattle market.
And why do you say that? What do you mean by that?
Well, within the condo market, the highest benefit we had was 3%, and he's reflecting something less than 4%, which I mean, according to other people we've talked about, that's not measurable in the market, but apparently it is.
When you say according to what other people?
Well, Mr. Givens and Mr. Stratos are saying that's within the margin of error, and it's not calculated, to be able to calculate that in the market.
Okay. On page 3 of Exhibit C31, under the heading, are the park improvements best characterized as a park, greenway, or parkway? And my question for you is, did you consider the entire LID to be a park?
No, we didn't look at the LID area as a giant park. We recognize the different elements associated with the project.
Okay, and what are those different elements? What are those different elements?
You have open space, you have walkways, running paths, bike lanes, streetscapes.
In this section,
and you've also got the unique element of the overlook walk, which provides a unique amenity to the waterfront.
There's a quote in this, there's a sentence in that same paragraph where Dr. Crumpton says, quote, this suggests the appropriate designation is parkway rather than park. Do you agree that the appropriate designation for the LID is a parkway?
It's just semantics. I mean, I looked at it more like park-like amenities in a lot of the area. Like something like the overlook walk is difficult to quantify. As it has open space. It's got connectivity passed down to the promenade area. The promenade has open space and walkways and landscaping, and there's also streetscapes up and down the Pine Corridor and Pioneer Square. So there's a lot of different elements within the LID that distinguish it differently from just being a park.
And so if ABS didn't view the LID improvements as parks, why does your final benefit study reference Dr. Crumpton's 2001-2004 study?
Well, it has park-like amenities, and this type of study is good background to show that it's logical that if a park is benefiting to the degree that Dr. Crompton's indicating, it's logical that residential properties in close proximity to improvements like are being done for the LID would have a positive influence on the market, and studies like this clearly show that. He's obviously highly well publicized, and we felt it was good background information in that respect.
I'll take you to page 7 of Exhibit C31, please. The first full paragraph states, I quote, "The appraiser throughout his report disregarded the 500 and 2,000 foot measures, 2,000 feet measures, and used only the block measures for the LID assessments." Did you rely on Dr. Crompton's studies to determine the distance at which properties would see a value increase from the lid improvements?
No.
So how did ABS determine how far the benefit of the lid improvements extended?
Again, looking at a parcel by parcel analysis, looking at physical geographical differences, looking at studies like this for background information, together with studies we looked at in other cities.
So how did Dr. Crompton's research that you cite factor into these valuations?
Well, it showed that residential properties are influenced by amenities similar to that in some respects as the Waterfront LID is doing. So it provided good background information primarily to the residential property market, that there is positive influences for similar types of elements that are being constructed by the LID improvements.
On page 8 of Exhibit C31, Dr. Crompton has a critique of ABS's use of the park quality scale. And he's got two charts here. So one is entitled Park Quality Scale for Determining Approximate Premiums. Do you know where that comes from?
That comes directly from his report.
Okay. And the one below that, a little 4 cells, 3 rows, entitled Quality of Park, Distance, Green Premium. Where does that, what's that?
What this chart is from additional discussion that he has within his study, and just for a more ease of reading, we created the chart, but it's based on exactly what he said in his study. We just put it in a chart form.
And why does your benefit study discuss Dr. Crompton's park quality scale?
It provides good information to see what types of different park amenities he classifies as being more appealing to the market.
Next on page 11, Dr. Crompton has a section entitled The Negative Impacts of Disamenities on Premiums, page 11 of Exhibit C31. The third paragraph down, I'll read that into the record. The appraiser identified this is a quote, the appraiser identified 2 potential negative impacts. He indicated loss of parking spaces was incorporated in his assessments. I believe he's quoting your final benefit study here. Some parking losses along Alaskan Way in the waterfront area will occur due to the project, and this is considered in the analysis. Back to Dr. Crompton, but there is no overt description of how it was considered in the analysis. My first question is, did you consider potential disamenities caused by the improvements?
Yes.
Okay, and specifically to parking, how did you consider that in your analysis?
Again, on a parcel by parcel basis.
Okay. And is that described in your report?
It is discussed in the report. It would be more relevant within the individual worksheets of those properties that we felt were more impacted.
Okay. And did ABS consider other potential disamenities caused by the improvements?
Such as?
Well, let me ask, I guess, a more basic question. Did your research demonstrate negative impacts caused by the LID improvements?
Well, the main one would be parking. I think he refers to congestion in his letter, and I don't know if he's referring to.
Yeah. I'll take you up to the second sentence, Bob, in the first paragraph. These may include congestion, increased traffic flow, lack of parking or unwanted on-street parking, litter, vandalism, intrusive lighting, and groups engaging in morally offensive activities.
Yeah, again, I mean, any relevant considerations for that? The LID isn't a street or transportation improvement LID. So as far as any traffic congestion goes, that would be relatively similar, both in the before and after. It's not part of the LID, and with the LID in place, then there's a strong management plan to really help keep the area clean and well patrolled and maintained. And then that was considered in our analysis.
Finally, on pages 11 and 12, Dr. Crompton discusses a section entitled "The Diminishing Marginal Valuation of Premiums." And I have a quote for you. It's on page 12. I want to ask you about. It's on page 12. Toward the middle of the page, a little lower than the middle. It says, quote, a consequence of water premiums of this magnitude is likely to be a diminished marginal valuation of the additional units of benefit premium that may be anticipated from the new greenway. First, I'll ask, what do you understand Dr. Crompton's argument to be here?
I'm not really sure if he's talking about the view amenity that's enhanced from the removal of the viaduct that creates that magnitude. I'm not real clear on what he's getting at there.
And I believe that you testified earlier that your before condition of the properties takes into account that view, the valuation of that view amenity?
That's correct.
Did your research, or how did your research, or let me say, what did your research into other projects reveal with respect to properties that already had a premium view, but had an improvement on top of that?
Yeah, there was definitely still a positive impact on the market. It made it even a more desirable amenity.
And could you give me some examples, if you recall any? Yeah,
well, for instance, Boston, once the viaduct was removed and the greenway was in place, provided an enhanced connectivity to to the waterfront, similar to San Francisco, in Portland and other areas like that.
In those studies, there was an observable value benefit beyond just the improved view amenity?
Yes.
All right, I'll ask you to look at the last exhibit that I have for you, exhibit C32, please. Could you identify for us what that is?
This is a document by Northwest Property Tax Consultants addressed to Frank Humer and Gerald Lutz, RE Waterfront LID proposed final assessment parcels, and he has two tax parcel numbers associated with it.
And who's the, you know who the specific author is?
Benjamin Scott.
Have you read this document?
Yes.
Okay. And what property is this, is the concern of this? What specific property is the concern of this letter?
He's looking at the Stratos apartment complex.
Please tell us about the Stratos apartments.
The Stratos apartment is located at 9th and Lenora, and it's a fairly new 2016 41-story luxury apartment that has 396 units. There's 8,000 or so square feet of retail and a considerable amount of parking.
If you recall, what did ABS calculate as a special benefit to the Stratos apartments?
We were, I think, 442,000.
What is that based on?
Based on the locational amenities and desirability of the apartment complex before and after the LID improvements.
And what approach to value did you use to arrive at your special benefit estimates?
Primarily the income approach.
On page 2 of Exhibit C32, there's a section entitled Benefits are Misallocated. Have you read that before?
Yes.
And Mr. Scott talks about the Volta and compares the special benefit estimated for the Stratos apartments to Volta, to Elliott Point Apartments, and to Second and Pine Apartments. And so how do you explain, first, are you aware that the dollar amount of special benefit for the Stratos is higher than the Volta, Elliott Point, or Second and Pine Apartments special benefit amounts?
Yes.
So how do you explain a higher special benefit valuation for the Stratos than those properties when the Stratos is located farther from the LID improvements?
Well, he's comparing a 396 unit luxury apartment complex to extremely smaller apartment complexes that are located in much closer proximity to the waterfront amenities. The Volta and Elliott Point apartment complexes are 6 to 8 stories. They're only 40 to 60 approximately units in size. The Second and Pine Apartments is an older 1910 improvement that obviously is in a very prime location. So when you're looking at the dollar amount of benefit for those properties, they typically range from about 0.6 to 0.7% for the Elliott Point and the Volta, and I believe the Second and Pine was approximately a 2% increase in value. So although the dollar amounts are less than the Stratos apartments, it's due to their age, their size, differences in relation to an extremely larger property. So they're really not comparable. A good proportionality comparison to the Stratos apartment would be the McKenzie Apartments, which is located at 8th and Blanchard, and it's a similar 400 unit complex built right about the same time. It's got a benefit of about 400,000 and a percentage relationship of about 0.12% increase, consistent with the Stratos. So something like that's a lot better comparison than trying to compare a 396 unit apartment, although it's located farther away, just due to the significant size magnitude of that property, even though it's got a lot smaller percentage benefit amount, it just creates a higher dollar amount. So the properties closer to the waterfront amenities have to have a higher percentage increase, which is logical. They're closer to the improvements, and that proportionally the market would pay a higher percentage increase relative to other properties located farther away. So the main element is just the trying to confuse the dollar amount increases due to significant differences in size and age in apartment complexes.
So I'm going to step back. That's all the questions I had for you on C32, and I just have potentially one or two additional questions for you to summarize your direct testimony. For the experts or expert witnesses, consultants that objectors retained in these cases, how many conducted independent appraisals of parcels within the lid?
The only actual appraisal that was done was by Mr. Gordon.
Okay, and how many of the experts or consultants or appraisers retained by objectors conducted a special benefit study?
None.
And if you'll just give me actually less than a minute, I'll just confirm that I have no additional questions for you. There's just one thing I wanted to look at. One last thing. When you're calculating special benefits, is proximity to the improvements the only consideration?
No.
What else do you factor into your analysis?
You're also looking at the type of improvement, the use of the improvement, the desirability of the improvement in the market relative to its location to elements that are within the LID boundary.
And what impact do existing improvement, I'm using the word improvements, we have the LID improvements, but I've heard you testify calling existing buildings on parcels improvements. So I'll use that terminology. What impact do existing buildings on a parcel have on the value add from the LID improvements?
Yeah, just depending on the building type and location, many are significant in size, which will impact the amount of benefit to that particular property. Okay.
And then what impact if a parcel has some existing improvements to it that its owner undertook to beautify the property or something like that, what impact do those existing improvements have on the value add of additional improvements like the LID improvements?
Well, we would look at the property as it exists, and if they were complementary to what the LID improvements are providing to the market, such as if a property added additional retail space that captures additional tourists that may come and visit the area from the before to the after, then those types of amenities would create a greater desirability for that type of property investment.
And does your before scenarios capture the existing improvements that property owners may have done? For example, beautification that existed at the time that you did your before value conclusion?
Yes, they would be the same both in the before and after.
I don't have any additional questions for you, Bob. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anything further from the city for a presentation of its case in chief?
I'm sorry, Mr. Hearing Examiner. I had just turned my speaker back on. If you could please repeat.
Yes. Anything further from the city as part of its case in chief?
No, the remaining testimony we would submit via declaration at the close of our case.
Okay. One question I do have is and I'll reserve my questions for any of the witnesses until next week, but there was at one point, Mr. McCauley indicated that, for example, the United Way air rights had not been caught, and that there should be an adjustment made for that. I don't know if there are any other properties or any other items that have come up over the course of the months-long hearing we've had that have presented in the objections. Is there any anticipation for the city to let me know that there's an adjustment needed or request for that?
There is, yes. We're working with Mr. McCauley on how best to submit that. There is the United Way, and I'll ask Mr. McCauley, or how many other parcels, Bob, are you aware of where you intend to submit an adjustment?
That's the one. That's the main one that comes to mind. I would have to go back and review, but that was the main one that came to mind.
All right. It would probably be helpful if you intend to do that to at least be able to identify those orally before we start cross, so that anyone planning on cross isn't wasting their time.
Absolutely.
If that's possible. I'm not going to hold you to having to do that. You don't have to do it. You've got your declarations, and it sounds like some additional declaration statement may be coming in from Mr. McCauley, but that might be responding to some of the specific objections. But if that can be done in advance of, maybe at the outset on Tuesday, if there's anything out the United Way or anything else, that would be helpful in case those objectors can take out those questions, and we can save some time in cross.
Sure.
All right. All right, then let's turn to our discussion about our schedule for next week. I believe much of the process has been captured in my order for hearing schedule and cross-examination. Some discussion we've had today about exhibits. I do want to make sure that process is clear. And I've got only a little bit to address on that, to clean up on how we might approach exhibits. Particularly, I know that this could be a little challenging for some of our pro se participants. After I have a couple comments, then I'm going to ask objectors if there's any clarification, or the city, if there's any need for clarification or any information you need before we go into cross-examination starting on Tuesday. What I will suggest is, we've talked about the need to identify exhibits that you intend to reference, both either by an existing exhibit number that's established in the record under your case number or the city's. But then to pick up from where your case left off with the exhibit numbers. And you are excused, Mr. McCullough, if we're done for the day. So if you want to step out, that's fine. Again, from the pre-hearing order on the schedule for cross-examination, the objector's deadline is to make a good faith effort to submit all exhibits you intend to introduce, to exchange those with the city and provide them to the hearing examiner, exchange them with each other is noon, June 22nd, that's Monday. And those should be submitted to my legal assistant. The ones that are coming to us should be submitted to my legal assistant. The city, you want to identify where you want to receive those now so that they know what email to send them to for you. And I'm assuming for objectors that you all have each other's emails by now from our pre-hearing conference.
To myself and Ms. Thompson would be fine. And certainly happy to share. Of course, I won't know if someone doesn't have our emails, I guess, but I agree that they should have them from the pre-hearing conference.
All right, they should have them from the pre-hearing conference. They should also be on the Zoom invite. If anybody doesn't have them, please circulate amongst your fellow objectors to locate those emails for Mr. Filippini and Ms. Thompson. If at the end of the day you don't have those, in the morning on Monday, if you still don't have them, you can certainly ask my legal assistant, Mr. Edwin Cho, for those emails so that you can appropriately exchange them. One item I do want to highlight is that for documents that you're assured everyone has a copy of, the ABS studies is a perfect example. You don't need to exchange copies of those. This is not done in order to punish you, to have just an exchange of a great deal of paper. It's done in order to enhance everyone's ability to follow along when you're presenting your case. So if everyone has a copy of something already, you don't need to provide that. If you have any question in your mind whether people have a copy, someone may not, and it's your obligation then to provide that so that in the course of your cross-examination, you're ready to go with everyone having those copies. I'm leaving it to the objectors to let me know on Tuesday. I think I had intimated earlier that I was going to try in the course of direct at the end of each witness to make a list of which objectors intended to cross on which witnesses. I'm abandoning that. I think that's too much for you to know immediately. And so just expect at the outset on Tuesday that objectors who plan to do cross be prepared to identify who will be doing cross and in what order you will be doing that cross come Tuesday. If for some reason there's not an objector, if for some reason there's an objector who has been allowed to do cross that has not participated in coordinating with other objectors or has not been on this direct with the city and is not part in the loop essentially, and they're just showing up on Tuesday to ask their questions, I will likely just put them at the end of the line of questioners so that those of you who are organized don't have to get out of order. If you encounter problems coordinating amongst each other, we can address that on Tuesday and just see how that works. I recognize that this is not a set course. I recognize we're trying to function in the context of a pandemic and that there's always something new coming up. So we'll certainly try to address that as we can. But what I'm trying to do is provide you some structure though, so we can approach this as efficiently as we can come Tuesday. Those are my only comments with proceeding. We do have the pre-hearing order for scheduling cross-examination to reference to. Are there any questions, concerns? Happy to entertain suggestions as well. This is my first pandemic by remote hearing, so I welcome the collaboration and efforts that everyone's put in so far. I think a lot of you have done a good job. I've focused on some who haven't, but I think some of you are really giving it a good shot. I appreciate that. So are there any questions, comments, concerns?
This is Mr. Moses. I have a question regarding the additional declarations that the city is going to file. When will those be available?
Those are due the 26th, June 26th. Those are due.
So they're due after cross, but before our closing arguments are due.
Yes, yes, that's correct. And then you have a deadline, but all of those dates are identified in the pre-hearing order. And just a moment. That was the pre-hearing order dated June 12th. That set those dates out. And yes, the declarations are due on the 26th, and then objectors have a corresponding deadline for an opportunity to respond in writing.
Until July 6th. That's right?
I've got July 7th, I think.
Okay, that's probably right. I was doing it from memory.
Okay.
So to help me from a procedural standpoint here, it's maybe a legal question. If I have made an objection that has not been rebutted in the city's direct case, and I include it in my closing arguments, it's not in any of their declarations, they're going to see my closing arguments and have another week to rebut something they didn't do in direct. I'm just baffled by that process. I'm
not. You may be mixing terminology. I don't quite understand. I'm not sure if you're clarifying for me, and I may be the one that's confused, but when you say you've raised an objection, are you talking about your legal issues, or are you talking about a procedural objection? Like
No, not a procedural objection. If I have raised in my appeal an
Yes.
objection
Yes.
to a specific item, and that has not been addressed in the city's direct testimony, okay, at all. So if
Okay.
I put it in my closing arguments, and they get a week to respond, and so that now they rebut it in closing arguments. My understanding is they would be done indirect. If they don't rebut what I've proposed or stated, that they're done. And is that not the case?
So if the city has not addressed the specific argument that you've raised, either by witness, in direct testimony, or by declaration, and then you indicate in your closing, hey, they didn't address this at all in their argument. You're suggesting that they might be able to, for the first time, try to address it in their reply?
Yes.
Generally, that would not be allowed. They must have done something that would indicate that they've addressed this somewhere, that you would have had an opportunity to respond to it.
Thank you.
The process is an inverted pyramid. You had your chance to make your case. The city had to respond to it. They have to respond to what you're doing. So
Thank you.
Raising new arguments at the end of the hearing is not generally allowed. They would have to, in their reply, reference back to something they did to address your arguments. And the intent of the process was, we've laid it out, is that the city has an opportunity both in testimony and in writing to respond to everything objectors have raised.
Thank you.
Did you have any further questions, Mr. Moses?
No.
Okay, Ms. Lynn, did you have a question?
Yes, I do, with respect to exhibits. So for example, with you said, you know, if you're sure everyone has a copy, there's no need to circulate additional copies. So for example, if we're going to be using the final study or any of the other cities, any of the other exhibits used by the city in its direct, we do not have to circulate those on Monday at noon. And we should only be circulating exhibits that are either new or that are existing under our case numbers, but that we are unsure that but that other objectors may not have access to.
Yes, I think that's a very succinct way of putting it. I think you've hit it. As you were speaking, I mean, it occurs to me, essentially, all of you now have copies of the city's exhibits that were submitted over the past 2 days. So as examples of items you don't need to exchange again on Monday, you can list them in your exhibit list so that we know what you're going to be turning to. It's helpful for us to know what you'll be referencing. So I would put those in your exhibit list, but you all know that you have copies by now of the city's exhibits presented during their case in chief. So exchanging those again, there's simply no point in that.
I'm sorry, I'm going to clarify one more point. You are expecting, however, a list of all the exhibits we will be relying on to also be submitted on Monday at noon.
Yes, and this is, again, a good faith effort that I'm asking you to take. So if you intend to rely on documents, this is so that we know where you're going with your case, and so people can open things at the appropriate time and follow along, so we don't all have to pause and wait for everyone to catch up, is that there would be an exhibit list submitted at that time. Again, this is not intended as an opportunity for preclusion of subsequent exhibits or identification of exhibits that were not on that list. It's a good faith effort at having a clear communication with each other, recognizing that this is a last minute request, and it's just an attempt to get us organized as best we can.
Thank you. And just to confirm, because there has been some confusion among the objectors, each objector should be submitting their own list of exhibits and then their own circulating copies of those exhibits that others have not had access to you and to the other objectors via email by Monday at noon, correct?
That is correct. The only reason I'm not going to. Objectors have been asked to make an effort to coordinate amongst yourselves So if something you do changes that, that makes it more efficient, that's fine. So for example, if you are all going to have, and this is a guess, you guys are going to handle yourselves how you want, but let's say there's 3 attorneys who are going to go 1, 2, and 3 in that order, and some people are going to say, look, I've only got a few questions. You guys asked the bulk of them. If 1 or 2 or 3 parties say we're listing all of the exhibits for us because we're handling the bulk of the questions, that's fine. But I just don't know what level of coordination you guys can achieve in the short amount of time you've been given. So I'm not demanding that you over-organize yourself, but if you're able to achieve that, that's great.
Thank you.
Any other questions before we adjourn for the day and look to reconvening on Tuesday?
I had one on behalf of the city. Our witnesses, other than Mr. McCauley, so Mr. Foster and Mr. Lukens have asked whether they can assume at this point that they will go on Thursday, but I wanted to check with you before. I certainly assume that there'll be a day of testimony for Mr. McCauley, but anyway, I said I would ask.
I think that's a reasonable assumption. If somehow by miracle we get through Mr. McCauley in a single day, I'm not going to hold anybody to not having the next witness in line. So let's go ahead and assume that. And if we all go home early on Tuesday, that'll be fine.
Thank you.
Any other questions for the remainder of our as we get closer to the end of the hearing? Anything else that we need addressed? Of course, will be an opportunity to address further process and answer questions in the upcoming days. All right, then. Hearing none, we've concluded the city's case in chief. We remain with only the segments of cross-examination from the cross-examining objectors and then some briefing. Again, I appreciate everyone's cooperation in moving us through 2 days of hearing with a number of people on board. It's duly noted that everyone has made a very good effort to get us to this point. And I look forward to our remaining days of argument and the questions that we'll hear from the city's witnesses. Thank you. We're adjourned for the day and we'll return on June 23rd, 9 a.m. Tuesday.